Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. My name is indeed Maarten Oranje, and I will be presenting today on the subject of political evolution. And I would like to start by showing this map, which is a political map of the world, and it has the countries in colors, which we are all very used to. But in this particular political map, the color of the state has a meaning. So in this map, this is published each year by the Fund for Peace, and it displays the Fragile States Index. So it shows the level of fragility of a country in the world, meaning that the blue countries in this map, they are considered to be the most sustainable, according to the Fund for Peace. They have like maybe 10 to 12 different indicators to measure that. And the countries in green, they are still fairly stable. For the countries in yellow, there are already some danger signs. Orange gets worse, and red, and especially deep red, those are the most fragile states on the planet Earth, considered by Fund for Peace. Okay, so I would like to take this map as a starting point, and also say that it's a starting point for analyzing political evolution. And claiming already that normally when we look at a political map of the world, we're not actually looking at a homogeneous order of states. That's what we normally see, but I think this map shows that it's not a very homogeneous order. I will come back to that later. A little bit about my own background. I graduated in European Studies here from the University of Amsterdam, so I got to study a lot of nation and state formation during the centuries, and also the process of European integration in the 20th and 21st century. So actually I got to study here some of the most advanced states in the world. My work right now is in international development, in development aid, so I get to visit and to work in the most fragile states of the world. So actually last week I was in Central African Republic, which is in deep red on that map. It's considered to be the third most fragile state in the world. So it has given me the opportunity to see the difference between very advanced states and their development, and the level of development of these very fragile states. And then 3 years ago I stumbled upon big history, and it also changed very much the way I see these developments. So it has made me think in terms of emergent complexity when it comes to politics, to political systems, and it has made me think in terms of evolution, so which I will do today. Okay, big history when it comes to politics. Well, speaking about complexity, I would say very briefly that I see a state as being just another pocket of complexity. Organizational, political, social complexity. Just as planet Earth is a pocket of complexity, a star will be a pocket of complexity, a biological cell, a human body, a city. Just in the same way I see a state as a pocket of political complexity. It can be either very big, like Russia, or very small, like San Marino. The first one being more than 50,000 times larger than the second one. So that already tells us that states can exist in very different sizes and of very different nature. Okay, then to political evolution, because that's my main subject for today. Within the political sciences and within history, it's not very common to speak about states in terms of evolution. There are some authors who do, and well, there are 3 of them that I would want to point that have published quite recently books that I think are in a way evolutionary. The first one is Francis Fukuyama. He's of course well known for the book The End of History and the Last Man, 1992. But I find much more interesting his recent work, published in 2011 and 2014, 2 volumes about the political history, the history of politics, dating it back even to chimpanzee politics. So really from the beginning, from before humankind was on the scene, and he takes a bit of an evolutionary approach there to politics. Another book that I would like to mention is by Darina Chimoglu and James A. Robinson. I think one is a political scientist and the other an economist. And they published in 2012 the book Why Nations Fail: The Origins of Power, Prosperity and Poverty. So in both books, in both titles, we see the word origins. In this book, I think they make a few great mistakes. They completely disregard the influence of geography and of climate. They focus solely on institutions, but on the other hand, it does give us the opportunity to study institutions, and that's what I want to focus on today. I don't focus on the biological reasons, or the geographical reasons, or the reasons related to the climate. I focus on the role of institutions in state building. And then I will take, as I already said, of course, a big history perspective. Okay, what I will do, I will try to be rigorous in applying an evolutionary approach. So, not just saying evolution as a synonym to development, but saying, okay, if we talk about evolution, we talk about species, we talk about origins of species, and we talk about evolutionary principles. So we talk about replication, about mutation, and about selection. So it's a little more than just development. Okay, looking at that, of course, we have the traditional model for political development, as we see it in archaeology or anthropology, which says, okay, it went from band, maybe 10 to 50 people, to tribes, maybe a few thousand people, to chiefdoms, it went to states. So this is, I think, the first trend that we can see. There is a trend of upscaling. That's, I think, very obvious in big history. We see upscaling in political evolution. Important there, I think, is the mechanism. What is the main mechanism for upscaling? I think probably the main reason are external threats. External threats, they act as a catalyst for upscaling, and this is a very traditional example. I might very well have a fight with my brother, should I have one. I might very well have a fight with my brother. But whenever my brother would then get into a fight with my nephew, I would probably join my brother and team up with him against my nephew. Would then my nephew get into a fight with a complete stranger that I've never seen before, of a completely different religion? Most probably me and my brother will still team up with him against this complete stranger. And this is the basic model for upscaling. But what we see basically is units that are clicking together under external threat. Should there be no external threat, then they will fight between them. There is an external threat, and they start teaming up and together fighting the common enemy. So this is, I think, the basic model for upscaling. Probably you are familiar with these. When we talk about initial state formation, then there are some Goldilocks conditions that are generally considered that need to be in place for states to form in the first place. Well, I just mentioned external threat really does a good job in helping to form a state. Charismatic leadership will definitely help. Preferably a surplus of resources and a physical circumscription. So, for example, in the Nile Valley, it's much easier to form a state than in the middle of the desert. Or than in, let's say, that in the plains, in fertile plains. Okay, what is very important here to notice is that generally this process of centralization is a violent affair. And that goes for almost every state in the world. It came about in quite a violent way. We already see that when we look at the two monopolies. The two traditional monopolies for the state are a monopoly on the legitimate use of violence. So I as a state can use violence, but you cannot. And the monopoly on taxation. And that is initially meant to finance an army. Okay, just to quote two famous quotes on this subject. The American sociologist Charles Tilly, he said, "War made the state, and the state made war." That is how states came about. David Christian, in his keynote speech 2 years ago, he said basically the state is a mobilization machine for warfare, initially. And from there, a process starts of path dependency. Power, as we all know, is addictive. So once you have, once these units they have clicked together, there is a tendency to continue along this path. Power is addictive. Entangling gets difficult. Once you're on this path of emergent complexity, entangling gets more and more difficult, and there are certain economies of scale. So it might be more energy efficient to work together with different units than to work on your own. So what I would want to say there, my second general trend is that state centralization preceded inclusiveness, preceded democratic accountability. Nowadays we live in states where we very much value democratic accountability, but in almost every single case, centralization had to come first before democratic accountability. Okay, now having a look at the evolutionary principles to take it or to make it more rigorous. What are they? Three general principles in evolution are replication, mutation, and selection. How do we see them at play in politics? Replication we see in a succession of kings, succession of emperors, dynasties, governments. It's in a way, it's a reproduction of the state in a slightly different form each time. So there we already also see mutation. With every new government or every new king, we see a form of mutation. But for example, we also see it in institutional drift. So institutions within a state, even if they start from initially from the same conditions, they will drift apart over time. That's what we call institutional drift, just like genetic drift in biology. And what we see is adaptive radiation. Once states have come about, and one state will exist, others will probably see the success of the state and copy the model in a slightly different way, and that's what we call adaptive radiation. So we see mutation at play. We see replication at play, and we see mutation at play, and we see selection. We see selection, for example, in the form of wars, but it can also be all other types of external events, to call them external. And I will now label them, following the two authors, Acemoglu and Robertson, I will label them critical junctures in history. And I will explain what I mean by that. So replication, mutation, and selection. They say some critical junctures in the history of states. One very important one was the Black Death. So 1346 to 1353, when about a third of the population of Europe was killed, and it was caused by the plague. They claim that was a very defining moment in European history because it acted as a critical juncture, meaning that states that were only slightly different beforehand, they went on different paths afterwards. So they say it acted as a catalyst for more inclusive states in Western Europe, and at the same time it acted as a catalyst for more extractive states, more repressive states in Eastern Europe, and to the reintroduction of serfdom. That's very interesting. I don't have the time to go into it, but I think it's a very interesting analysis. I think the more obvious one is the second one, which are the journeys of exploration in the 15th and 16th century. They acted as a catalyst for more inclusiveness in Western European societies, but at the same time they acted as a catalyst for more extraction and repression in the Americas. So these critical junctures, they have a selection effect. They set in motion virtuous and vicious circles. It can be one of the two. Okay, then we have these so-called external events. What can states do, or how is the fate of the state determined by these external events? What can they do to protect themselves from external events? First of all, of course, they can erect borders. Right now it's very here in Europe. This is an issue. You know, this is discussed all the time. We used to have borders. Then internal borders actually they were disappearing within European states. Between European Union states. But what we see next is the erection of external borders along the Mediterranean and also in Eastern Europe. We now see external borders. And should the EU not do that, then what we see is that EU member states actually decide to re-erect the original internal borders. Because if you're not going to protect us from the outside, then we will protect ourselves. We need some form of protection by borders. And for example, here you see the border between between Hungary and Croatia, which are both EU member states. Okay, that's one way to protect yourself, or that determines your fate to some extent at these critical junctions. I think even more important is the internal organization of the state. So do you have an extractive state from the beginning, or do you have an inclusive state, an inclusive society? You can think of political extraction and of economic extraction, but in the end, most of the time, the two team together. So political extraction can hardly exist without economic extraction of the rest of the population by the elite, and the other way around. And Acemoglu and Robinson, they say, and they make quite a strong claim that prosperity of a society, of a state, is largely determined nowadays by the level of inclusiveness of the society. So to what extent is the entire population taken into account when taking political decisions? And they say extractive states, more repressive states, they may very well exist, but there is a ceiling to economic prosperity in that particular political model. So as a first trend, I would like to take that in general we see, okay, as a second trend I said centralization of power precedes democratic accountability, precedes inclusiveness, but after that, once the state has come about and once power has been centralized, then a process of more inclusiveness has to come about. That is my point here. Okay, last trend, and then we have to. Okay, we have to have a quick look at the internal organization of the state. Traditionally, we have the three branches of government: the executive branch, the judicial branch, the legislative branch. It's also the trias politica by Montesquieu. So, in the words of Fukuyama, we talk about state centralization at the executive branch, the rule of law at the judicial branch, and democratic accountability at the legislative branch. All three of them have to be in place for a well-functioning system, at least to some extent. But what I think is very interesting, what Fukuyama now says, because I think this is what we've been knowing already for 200 years, in a way, Fukuyama says what is very important here is the sequence of events. So in which sequence did these branches come about? Was the centralization of state first, or was maybe some basic rule of law, some basic judicial branch first? That determines to a large extent where you will end up. He said whether you will end up in a system that is governed by rule of law or by rule by law. So by the king making the rules. Okay, so these are the general trends that I would discern. There is a trend towards larger, more multi-layered political entities over time. This upscaling in general at first goes at the expense of inclusiveness. So centralization of power precedes democratic accountability. Then afterwards, preferably there will be growing inclusiveness for a species, for a state to be successful, and a more advanced set of rules. So because extraction, if you continue extracting, then that will create a ceiling to economic prosperity. And finally, before this all started, with basic rules in place, if there were basic rules in place from the beginning, to begin with, then the chances of success for a state will increase. So a basic form of rule of law precedes centralization of power. So in a model, this should be, in a way, the sequence, or this could be the sequence, the recipe for successful political entity. First, there's basic rule of law, then there is state centralization, then more democratic accountability, and a more advanced rule of law come about. This is a model that I'm presenting, and I'm very well to accept all forms of critique or discussion afterwards. I have two more slides because I think it has some implications. If this is true, if this is a good model, then it has some implications on how we look, for example, to the developing world. Because if we say that centralization in general in a successful entity comes before more inclusiveness, then what about our claim, our case for democracy in developing countries? Maybe we should not focus first on democracy, maybe we should focus first on an effective government. First an effective government and then include more democratic accountability for the government. Maybe, this is a maybe. And secondly also for the European Union, it might have implications because we always complain about the democratic deficit in the European Union, there's not enough democracy. Maybe we are in that red phase of centralization of power and we are now only moving into this green phase of more inclusiveness. And now maybe it's about time to make things more inclusive. But maybe this first phase was in a way necessary for us to evolve. Okay, last slide. Because this is food for discussion. I'm wondering whether it might also be a recipe for successful new orders at other stages in big history. This very simple model of basic set of rules, then centralization, then more inclusiveness, and then an advanced set of rules. For example, in the biological cell, could RNA be a basic set of rules? Eukaryotic cells, are they a form of centralization within the nucleus? And is, for example, DNA a more advanced set of rules? This is very, I don't know. Any thoughts are welcome. And my last thought about this, okay, when I think about Homo sapiens now during the Anthropocene, are we also right here, you know? Have we been centralizing power now in our own hands as a dominating species on the surface of the Earth? And is it now time for more inclusiveness, for taking into account the interests also of other species and of the planet itself? So that is, I did have one or two more slides, but I will stop here.